Welcome to the Port City Plate Podcast, presented by Bienville Bites Food Tour. The Port City Plate Podcast, serving up the food, history, and people of Mobile, Alabama for people who love the Port City. I'm your host, Chris Andrews, and we have done it, man. We've done 50 interviews of the Port City Plate Podcast. So I thought, hey, we've done 50 podcast interviews. Let's call it season one. Let's call it a season one, and let's kind of put a little bow on it, and I'll, recharge the batteries and be back for season two. I know you're probably thinking, this might have been the longest season of podcasts in podcast history. I don't know, but again, we'll call it season one. And but man, it's been so much fun. I've really enjoyed putting out some of this content and some of these episodes. It's been 2 years. I started this podcast 2 years ago with my friend Jeff Roberts as my first host. Just kind of getting my feet wet into the podcasting world, and I thought there would be nobody better than Jeff, who likes to talk a lot, and so it would be pretty easy to let him kind of carry me through that first episode, and he did. That was a great episode, and but man, I've of course had longtime friends that have joined me on this podcast, and people that I've met in the restaurant industry doing the Bienville Bites tours. People like Panini Pete. I've known Pete since day one of the tours, going back 7 years. So getting him on the episode or getting him on the podcast was pretty easy. I think Morgan Kelly with Mocha's, I've known her and her family for a long time. Meredith Zimmerman with Rennie's Honey Butter. David Rasp, known him, since, again, going back to the beginning days of Bienville Bites. And so, a lot of those were pretty easy to get on the podcast. But even the people I've met doing the podcast, that's been a joy too. I think Fabian Leon with Jefe Peletes, I didn't know him whenever he joined me. But man, what a great guy he is. And Frankie Little, really didn't know Frankie from Roosters that well, and got to know him a little bit through this, and so we've talked, and got together since then, and of course now our Bienville Bites tour has been making a stop at Roosters periodically, and so I'm happy to say that really cool relationships that have been made through this podcast. Roy Clark is another one from the Haberdasher, and we talked about Tiki Week, and so I love being able to do that. I've been really, I think, most impressed with the fact that there's been hardly any turnover from the episodes. We did 2 years of podcast episodes, 50 interviews, and the only turnover that I can think of from any of the places or people that we've talked to in these episodes was Alex Warner, who was at Bagel Boy. He's now got a place in Foley called Cheeseburger Randy's. And I think it's coming soon, but I have to keep up to date with Alex and maybe get a refresher from him. But that's the only turnover that I can think of that we've had on this episode. on this podcast. So I think that's pretty impressive. And again, it just goes to reiterate what most of you already know, that the food scene in Mobile is thriving. There's no doubt about that. I did lose one episode to some technology. I interviewed Noel Broughton, who was the owner of Debris. He also owns Bone and Barrel and Fairhope. Grace on Dolphin. He owns a lot of restaurants, and so that was I hated to lose that one, but it was a little technical difficulty on the computer side of things. So I have my audio from that interview, but I don't have his audio. So I'm gonna have to get Noel back in and recreate that episode again. And I haven't even told him that I lost that episode, so I hate that. But it was a good one. I go over the top 5 episodes from some of the statistics that I get, and the most popular episode was George Moore, the historian at the Battle House Hotel. George Moore is in his 90s, and he's been the historian at the Battle House for about 20 years now, really since they reopened the hotel in 2007. He's been their historian that's there. And so that was really cool hearing his stories. I think what stood out to me the most on that episode was the fact that he grew up in downtown Mobile, grew up kind of on the Wenzel's Moe's Barbecue end of downtown Mobile. and had chickens and poultry in his backyard, and he talked about this community of people that were living in downtown Mobile at that time. And so it's just really interesting to think about that. And especially from somebody that's, his age, thinking about that was probably during the Great Depression. Just so much perspective from him and how the fact that when he started working in this industry in segregated Mobile at the Battle House Hotel, when it was segregated, 1950s, to see him go on to work in the restaurant industry and the hotel industry later on at places like the Malaga and the Riverview. I'm amazed by that story, and I think I'll always cherish that one too, and I'm so glad that many of you did. Second most popular episode was the Pelican Girls episode that we did, where I sat down with one of the Pelican Girls, and that was a really fun episode too. I love that one. Roosevelt Patterson was the third most popular episode from La Floridas. Everybody loves Roosevelt. Everybody knows Roosevelt, and hearing his story about playing professional football, that was a good one as well. Matt Lamont from O'Daly's and Post. He was the fourth most listened to episode. That was I think that was the third episode that. Or the second episode. That was the second episode that I recorded from this podcast. So not much. Again, we talk about 2 years ago. Things have been consistently well in downtown Mobile. Shamira Sylvester, that was another popular episode that I did with Shamira, and I love hearing her experience and that she had in Washington, D.C., how she worked at the White House for a period of time, and that inspired her mission now to bring healthy eating habits to our community here in Mobile through juicing. And so that was a really eye-opening episode, and I think it resonated with a lot of people too. Some of my other personal favorites that were not on the top 5 most listened to episodes. One that really stood out to me that I talk about the most is the one we did with Chef Jim Smith from Hummingbird Way. And hearing his background, he had some great stories about being on some competitions and working for the governor. He had a really cool story that he shared with us, but I just really came away with a whole new appreciation for the Hummingbird Way, and what a gem of a restaurant that is. That every single menu item is local. Every single ingredient that he puts in those items are local. And so his commitment to this area, that's really just something unique that we have here in Mobile. And I think we take it for granted a little bit. But so go support the Hummingbird Way. That was a good one. I love the story that, of course, Cammie Wayne, when she came in and talked about becoming the owner of Old Dutch Ice Cream Shop after she worked there as a teenager. That was incredible. Bobby Lankford from Bama Bob's Barbecue. He was a barbecue judge for a local competition and thought he could do better. So he did, and went out and mastered the art of barbecue in this area. And so that's awesome. Vlad Molvanano from Mediterranean Sandwich. He was working as a dishwasher after Hurricane Katrina, and now he owns this just sandwich empire in this area with so many Mediterranean sandwich companies now that Daphne and Fairhope, several here in Mobile and even in Tuscaloosa. So Frankie Little, it's kind of the same story. 10 years ago, he was a server at the Bull. And now, he's been featured on the Food Network and got Roosters as one of the most popular places in Mobile. And even those are, you're gonna be seeing more Roosters. He's got franchising opportunities for people who are looking to go into the industry. I think you're going to see, I'd say another 10 years from now, I would bet Roosters would probably follow in line right there with Mediterranean Sandwich as having locations all across the area and the Gulf Coast. But it's one of those things that make you wonder, who else is out there right now? Who is working as a dishwasher or a teenager that's serving your ice cream or a server like Frankie who's out there hustling? And who's that next person that's going to become the next star of our food scene in Mobile? When we look ahead 10 years, 15 years from now. And so it's so important to support local restaurants and our establishments. I know this audience knows that, and I know y'all do that. But I would just encourage you to keep that up and encourage you to do that even more. Another personal highlight for me on this podcast was when I got a chance to have my kids on the episode. We did a little recap, 2023 recap of the podcast, and I got to have my daughter Audrey and my son Carson on the podcast, and so that was really special for me, and I hope it was something that they always remember. I know I always will. Really funny story that happened. School just started back a few weeks ago, and you know how the kids are always filling out these surveys at the beginning of the year, like interesting facts about you. And I told Carson, my youngest son, he's 7, and I told him, I was like, if anybody ever, you need an interesting fun fact about yourself, you need to tell your teacher that you were on a podcast. And so sure enough, the next night he told me, he said, "Do you remember what you told me yesterday?" And I was like, "No, I have no idea. What are you talking about?" He said, you told me to tell something interesting about me that I've been on a podcast. And he was like, I did that. And so it was so funny that he said, the teacher asked him, what's one thing your teacher needs to know about you that other people may not know? And that was his answer, was that he had been on a podcast. He said his teacher, just went crazy and told the little kid next to him, "You're sitting next to a celebrity." So like he came home and told me that. That was so funny. So, just little things like that too that I think I'll always remember. Hopefully it'll be something that they always remember. Of course, I think my kids are going to grow up and certainly have going out to eat as core memories with their dad at some point, because look, if you've seen me out, you've probably seen me with my kids, so that's certainly the theme of our family. And so I've enjoyed that. I really appreciate everybody listening. I can't tell you how much it motivates me to continue doing this when listeners come up to me and they tell me how much they enjoyed the podcast. I don't mean for this to sound like an obituary for the podcast. There will be a season 2. There's no doubt about it. I've got a ton of people lined up, a ton of people that I've talked to that want to be on the episode, want to be on the podcast, and I'm going to continue sharing those stories. I want to get over to Fairhope at some point and introduce you to some of my restaurateurs over in Fairhope that are doing some really good things as well. So, but I'd love to hear your feedback on what would you like to see for a season 2 and going forward with this podcast. Who are some people that we need to get on the podcast? I'm sure that I've got a pretty good list, but I'm sure somebody has fallen through the cracks that I need to get on. So tell me, like I said, reach out to me. And let me know, like, what segments of this podcast do you like? I kind of, I try to get, kind of personal with some of the podcast guests and talk about some of their favorites. And then I know everybody loves to hear about new restaurants coming soon. So I kind of incorporated that in the last few episodes with the segment that I called Fork in the Road, talking about some new places that are coming soon or new places that have opened up. But ultimately, this is just a passion project of mine. And, right, I've had a couple of sponsors that we've had throughout some of the episodes, a couple. But, really the big motivation behind doing this is just to continue growing the food scene here in Mobile. And it's your support, if you're listening, that's going to keep that going outside of some of the vague statistics that I can see from my platform that I host the podcast on. Really, again, it's your support of telling me pretty much in person that keeps me going and doing this. It's a lot of there's no doubt it's a lot of hard work that goes into it. Scheduling these interviews and recording and editing, publishing. I do all of it myself. I don't outsource it to anybody. So it's 50 interviews in. It feels like it's a good time to recharge the batteries, take a step back, see what's working, and again, like I said, get feedback from you and what you want to hear from the podcast going forward. So I welcome that feedback. I really do want that. You can send me an email. I think the best way to do that is porchcityplate@gmail.com. That's the best way to get in touch with me about this podcast. Again, that's porchcityplate@gmail.com. And do maybe consider a 5-star review. I think those help as well as, trying to increase the the reach of Mobile's food scene. So, hopefully if somebody's typing in Mobile, Alabama in the podcast search, hopefully this podcast will show up. And again, I think these stories need to be told. They need to be out there. These stories that you've heard over 50 episodes, you're just not going to hear these stories anywhere else. And so I'm so proud of that. I hope to see y'all out and about. I'm sure y'all be seeing a lot of you at local restaurants. So if you do, again, reach out to me and give me some feedback. And, of course, I do hope to see a lot of you on the Beanville Bites food tour as well. But look forward to season 2. Look forward to catching you on those episodes.